It's time for the Matt Anderson Show. Committed to encouraging, uplifting, and inspiring a generation.
My message to you is to find, take back, and keep your righteous mind.
All right, today we're talking with Jay Cameron. He's an entrepreneur. He's a author. He's a playwright. He's a community leader. He's a ministry leader. And he's my friend. We've been friends for 20-something years. We worked together years ago in radio back at Heaven 1580. And we've done a lot of different business projects together over the years, in both in ministry and in media. And so now he's just doing a lot of different things. And one thing that really caught my attention when Jay started to write this book entitled Fatherless Fathering. Welcome, Jay.
Well, thank you, Matt, for having me. Glad to be here and looking forward to sharing a little bit with everyone. And you just took me back down memory lane, just remembering all the different things that we've worked on over the years. So it's definitely good to be here and talking to everyone. Man,
it's a blessing, man. And I'm so glad that you and I are so connected over all these years, man. I've just watched how you really led your family as a father. I admire the way that you as a father and a husband have raised, your sons and your daughter, man. It's just a blessing in a lot of different ways, man. But it hasn't always been easy, and you didn't necessarily learn from the perfect cookie cutter model. And when you told me that you were writing this book, it was around the time that I said, hey, man, I'm producing this film on Black fatherhood. Right. The gift of his presence is the title of the film. And so I said, hey, man, I'd love to have you, be a part of this and talk about what your perspective on fatherhood, your experiences as a father and your experiences as a son. And some of the stuff you told me, I was like, whoa, okay, this is deep. And he's like, yeah, by the way, I'm writing a book about it. And man, you will turn something around in a minute. And you did just that. Finished this book, wrote it, proofread it, published it. It's out. And I'm in the process of reading it now. But tell me just a little bit of an overview about the book, Fatherless Fathering.
I tell people all the time, it's autobiographical practical. And the reason why I wrote it in a way similar to how I write my productions. And I wanted everyone to kind of understand the context of my life, because in order for them to understand the practical and to understand how deficient I was as a child, as a teenager, and then as a young adult, and even moving into fatherhood, it will now make more sense as to why the practical advice is so important to follow, because you're really learning from someone who didn't know, but now has the results to show for it. And that's what I look back on. I said, because there are no parents who are perfect. I talk about the mistakes that I made as a parent. I talk about what the goal is for the book, and how I want to make sure that when it comes to my children, they don't repeat the same mistakes that I made because they weren't trained. And so when you understand the impact of what a fatherless child or many fatherless children go through, because each person responds differently. Some people it doesn't faze them the same way or affect them the same way. Others are affected. So for me, not having my father present in my life and dealing with a lot of rejection that came severely impacted me. And that's what I really walked people through, to understand the mindset of that little child and the thoughts. Because if someone, let's say a single parent is raising a boy or a girl, because it's not just talking about boys, because a lot of girls go through the same thing. So if they're raising this fatherless child and they're trying to figure out, well, why are they hesitant? Why don't they seem like they have a lot of confidence? What's going on? Now I try to take them inside the mind of that 7-year-old, that 9-year-old, for them to perhaps gain some insight, and then offer them some practical steps on what they can do to help that child. Because it's like, all right, if you see them withdrawing, maybe you want to consider some sort of therapy, or having them to talk, or finding out some things that they like, and then maybe encouraging them to pursue that to help build their confidence, versus just thinking, oh, well, they're just going through a phase in life. So when you understand the depth of it, and I walk people through some very graphic aspects of my thought process and through life, but then I also walk them through, this is how you overcome it. And so it's a very, if you go on Amazon and you just kind of read the reviews, and when people share it, it's like, wow, I didn't realize it was going to impact adults the way that it's impacted adults.
So talk to us a little bit about how a father's handprint or a father's molding helps to guide an individual's self-worth. I mean, it was one thing you touched on even in the book, why it was an ongoing theme, was a self-value or a lack thereof because of a father's absence. You know, it was both physical, but it also seemed like your dad's absence was emotional as well. There was an emotional disconnect, even though he didn't live in the house, but it was also that emotional piece as well that affected you.
Well, most boys, and I won't say all, but most boys get their identity from their fathers. Now, my father was a very charismatic personality. He was someone that everyone loved. Everyone looked up to him. So when I see him, I'm like, wow, this is my dad, and he's popular. I'm like, wow, this is my dad. But then, why don't I have access to my dad? What did I do wrong? And that was what I kept thinking as a 9-year-old. I must have done something wrong. Why doesn't he want me to spend the night at his house? Why can't I just call him on the phone and ask him, to come over? He would, if I ever talked to him on the phone, it would always be at his office, or if we ever went out, it would always be at a public, like a McDonald's in DC or something. So what that did subconsciously, it told me that there was something wrong, but I did not know. So now think about a 9-year-old doesn't sit there and process this as an adult, and let me think about this now. They're not thinking context. They're thinking, well, where's my father? So what it did for me, I never was able to truly establish my identity as a man or a young boy through him. So it was kind of like, well, let me look at TV, or let me just try to figure this thing out. And so one of the things I do with my boys in particular is I make sure that I respect them as individuals. So I don't lump them all together and say, okay, all of you all are the same person and we're doing it all the same. I take the time to establish an individual relationship with them, with each one of them and my daughter, to say, okay, I see you as who you are, and I respect who you are. I'm not going to try to make you who I think you should be. I recognize your unique qualities, and I want to encourage that. Now, I never had that happen in my life, but I saw what happened to me because I didn't have that happen, and I didn't have that reinforcement. So I encourage parents all the time, make sure that, one, you have an individual relationship with each one of your children, and respect who they are as individuals, their unique qualities, and that will help build their self-worth, because they understand. And even if the other parent is absent, because sometimes parents are like, well, what do I do if the other parent is not there? Well, you can still, as the single parent, whether you're the mother or the father, you can still recognize their unique qualities, and that will help offset some of the deficiencies that will come as a result of the absent parent.
So just to kind of give everybody an update on, or an overview of what the book is about, it's a autobiography, but also it's sort of a counseling session, if you will. It's interesting.
Yes, it is.
It's a counseling session as well. But it's interesting that you've gotten, was it a total of 4 sets of families? Your dad had 4 sets of families.
We have four
who kind of,
different ones.
some knew each other, some didn't. So, it took you years to find out and connect with your father. I don't know if you did any, in-depth research, but even in your own findings and your own personal experiences, what are you finding in terms of how common is this especially in the African-American community?
Oh, it's very common. It's one of the most common. When I hear people say that it's a myth, I say to myself, I don't know what planet they're on or what world they're living in, but it's very common. And if it's not my generation, it will be the generation that came before me. It'll be my mother's generation, and then you'll find out. And back then, there was no social media. People did not, if they talked, it was just rumor and gossip. And so there were no counseling sessions, if you will. So a lot of things just kind of happened. And so there would be a family over, and it wouldn't be far, just far enough to drive, 20 miles away. So say, for example, like a lot of my family's from the Charleston, South Carolina area. So I know you're familiar with the area. So you might have a family in Charleston and another family in Orangeburg. And so, so it would be that type of a scenario. And, or like if you're in DC, you might have a family in Northwest and a family over in Arlington or something like that. That's how it works. So it's very common. It's not, but we don't talk about it. And I think the biggest part about this book is talking about this, because there's so many wounds that people are dealing with that are unspoken. I have a section called Trained to Cover Up Foolishness. And that's one of the things that I've seen within our community where we're trained to cover up foolishness. We will not talk about this. We will try to act like it didn't happen, and nobody's perfect. And it's like, yeah, nobody's perfect, but they still hurt a lot of people along the way. So how do these people reconcile these hurts? And when we dismiss people's pain, it's almost on many levels, it's almost like dismissing them. Because they're hurting, and then they get married, and now they're having all these issues in marriage. I talk about that in the book, how when I got married, I was totally untrained. And so now we're about to celebrate 22 years, and that's by God's grace, because we went through so much, because she had to deal with this man, but this little boy who was still trying to find out who he was as a man. And it was just so many different things. But to your question, it's very common in our community, and a lot of different communities.
What was the biggest aha moment or revelation for you, and when you found yourself writing the book, whether it was internal or external, or just what was that moment you said, whoa, I didn't know this, or wow, that helped me?
In writing the book, I think the biggest aha moment was coming to terms with how similar I am to my father. That's the part that I was like, wait a minute, this is, we have a lot of similarities, and I didn't spend more than 24 hours total in his presence in my life that I was aware of. And so even his last wife, every time she sees me, she's like, Jay, you don't understand. I feel like I'm looking at a young, I use his initial, a young JD. She always tells me that, and she said, the mannerisms, the way that you flow, the way that you articulate is almost identical to your father. And I'm like, I don't know how that's possible. And he used to work with youth. I mean, it's a lot of, wow. But see, these are things that, I think that's the biggest aha moment. And I don't know how that would have panned out if we were really around each other. And I talk about that because although he did those things, they were semi-authentic, because I don't want to dismiss what he did do for those other children, because he had a program, he worked with kids, and he did a lot with the Naval Academy and all of that. So I don't want to dismiss that, because it worked for them and there were results there. But I don't know if he would have necessarily been the best influence for me, because we were so similar. And I would have probably idolized him and looked up to him and probably repeated a lot of those same behaviors. I was already repeating the behaviors and didn't know it. So if I happened to be too much in his presence, I don't know where that would have gone. But it took me, many years to come to that conclusion. So I think that was the aha moment to say, wow.
You said that you spent roughly 24 hours, maybe 24 hours in your entire life in his presence. Then You said if you had too much of his presence, it may have magnified that. That's really interesting, because when you talk about presence, that's literally the title of our documentary film is called The Gift of His Presence. And we struggled for a year to figure out a name. We just kept producing and producing. I don't know what I'm going to call this film. We kept hearing all these threads, and then that was the one thing that kept coming out. It wasn't the money, it wasn't the identity. We kept hearing identity, of course, but the gift of his presence. And a lot of times, people will just try to give money, or they'll try to give a basketball, or try to give a bicycle. But it's the presence many times that makes a whole big difference in someone's life when it comes to fathering. And because, how can you be a man if you've never seen a man? And so you kind of had to find a way to pull together pieces of what you identified as a positive male role model. How did you do that, and who did you pull those resources together from?
Oh, goodness. It's, I struggled for, I would have to say, half of my life trying to piece it together. And it wasn't until probably about 2004 when I was coming out of up until 2004, the majority of the black men in my life that I looked up to had the same personality as my father, which was really interesting. So I felt like I kept attracting these type of personalities. But in 2004, I was really coming out of a difficult situation with a difficult professional and ministry situation. And so there was I met this pastor. I was speaking at a youth event, and I met him at the youth event, and I ran into him at an event in Atlanta. And he said, hey, let me just, how you doing, man? Good to see you again. And it was like he took me under his wing, but he never asked me for anything. He just kind of said, hey, I got you, you and your wife. My wife and I are here. We're here to help you. But we don't want anything. Now I'm suspicious because I'm already coming out of these situations. I'm like, okay, you want something. You want something. At some point you're going to want something. But he never, to this day, he's always been very genuine and sincere. And what he did was he modeled fatherhood and being a husband in front of me. And I watched how he treated his children, and I watched how his children respected him. And he was not overbearing or anything. And so if we want to talk about one person, that I would have to say, as far as positive influence, he by far, and his name is Pastor Ricky Temple. I'll tell you who he is. All right.
Put him out there. Shout him out.
So Pastor Ricky Temple, Overcoming by Faith Ministry, Savannah, Georgia. That's who he is. When I just think back over the years, he was there during some very difficult times my wife and I were going through. He's, welcomed us into his home. He's flown up here. We were going through some things, and he got on a plane. I said, but he never asked me he never said, Jay, now you owe me something. Now I did all of this or I own you. Never did that ever come up. And so, but yeah, that was a major turning point in the journey.
Hey, man, I want to remind everybody, so they can actually purchase the book on Amazon, and there's a hard copy or a download copy is both available on Amazon.com. It's called Fatherless Fathering. Jay Cameron is his latest work, his latest book, and it's a powerful insight. Now, next time, I don't want to squeeze everything into one conversation because you do a lot of different things. I mean, you climb to the top of Mount Kilimanjaro, literally. I'm like, bruh. And I watched your pictures and your posts all over the period of time that you did that as you prepared for it. And I really want to come back and talk about, your maximum impact travel, the things that you do, traveling to Africa and other parts of the world, and how people can get involved with that. And also some of the other business things that you're doing with, Life Camp, where you train young people in the arts and those kinds of things. So we're going to come back and talk some more, man. You just got so much, man. I admire your business hustle. And a lot of times you meet people who hustle and they just, they like Tommy, they got like 50 things going on. Yeah. This brother got like 50 things going on, and they all are happening at the same time. Like, for real. You can go to them
my nickname is Tommy, though. My nickname is Tommy. They call me Tommy in some circles.
But we know what you do, though. See, that's the thing about it. You can actually see what you do. So which website you want me to drive folks to, man?
They go to jcameron.com.
Okay, keep it simple. Keep it simple.
They go to jcameron.com, and they can scroll through and see everything that we have going on. Yeah. This, and I'll say this. One of the things that I'm excited about is this book embodies all of that. Everything that you just talked about. You'll understand why I do Life Camp, because I want to help children to navigate that time. And even though we're like in this virtual space, but even with maximum impact, of course, we have the travel component, but then we have the youth and young adult component. Everything I do is designed to help people overcome. And it's not just youth, it's adults. The feedback and the testimonials we're getting from people who've read the book, they're like, this is what, now I'm able to take another step forward. And it's not just for men. That's the other thing I tell people. This book was not, you hear fatherless fathering, but you could easily have it to say motherless mothering, because the issues are common in a lot of women and girls are dealing with fatherless issues. So it's a very comprehensive book, and it just offers a lot of insight.
So y'all go and pick up the book. It's called Fatherless Fathering. It's on Amazon.com. And of course, you can get more information about all the things that Jay is busy involved in doing with a level of excellence at jcameron.com. Man, appreciate you, brother. Man, appreciate you. Blessings to you and the family, and I'll holler at you soon, okay?
Appreciate it as well. Thanks, Matt.